thanks to the release of some new WWE 2K22 DLC, a name that hasn't been in the wrestling world's consciousness for quite some time has re-entered the conversation. Known for his signature Mohican hairstyle and copious amounts of gold jewellery, this man is the pitier of fools in more ways than one. But unless you've been watching wrestling since the early days, you probably don't know who this man is or the relevance that he has on the industry. So with that being said, my name is Cameron Bash, welcome back to the Movement channel, where today we're answering the question, who is Mr. T? On May 21st, 1952, the man who would go on to be known as Mr. T was born as Lawrence Chirode in Chicago, Illinois. He was the youngest of 12 children in his family, where he, his 7 brothers, 4 sisters and parents lived in a small 3-room apartment in the Robert Taylor homes. Like many high-rise apartment complexes in the heart of Illinois, the Robert Taylor homes face many issues related to drug abuse and gang violence, making it a difficult place to be brought up. If that wasn't bad enough though, at the young age of 5 years old, Lawrence's father, Nathaniel Chirode, who was a minister, left his family behind. Life became tough for Lawrence and the rest of the family that had been abandoned, but through this chaos, Lawrence and his mother grew very close, and she was able to keep him out of trouble as he was raised in these difficult circumstances. Due to this, Lawrence wanted to have as little relation to his father as possible, so he made the first decision that he would make on his path to becoming an individual. He shortened his name from Lawrence Chirode and started going by Lawrence Terro. Lawrence attended Dunbar Vocational High School, where he not only played football and studied martial arts, but he was also an amateur wrestler. Wrestling was something that Lawrence obviously had a passion for, as despite not getting the best grades while at school, he excelled at wrestling, becoming a 3-time wrestling champion during his time in high school. Upon graduating, Lawrence had won a football scholarship to play for Prairie View A&M University, where he attended the school majoring in mathematics. However, unfortunately, after just 1 year at the university, Mr. T was expelled for publicly unknown reasons, bringing his football scholarship to an end. Around this same time, in 1970, when he was just 18 years old, he legally changed his last name to T, meaning from this day forward, everybody would know him as Mr. T. In a quote from Playboy magazine in 1983 about why he made the decision to change his last name to T, Mr. T is quoted as saying, "I think about my father being called Boy, my uncle being called Boy, my brother coming back from Vietnam and being called Boy. So I questioned myself, what does a black man have to do before he's given respect as a man? So when I was 18 years old, when I was old enough to fight and die for my country, old enough to drink, old enough to vote, I said I was old enough to be called a man. I self-ordained myself Mr. T, so that the first word out of everybody's mouth is Mr. Mr. T would then spend the next 10 years of his life on a whirlwind journey that would not only see him get humbled and gain respect, but it was also this journey that would in fact lead him into the fame and glory that he would become known for. After leaving university, Mr. T first worked as a gym instructor for a government program in Chicago. He would go on to speak about how much he valued this experience, saying that it was here where he discovered a gift for helping children. After about 5 years of being a gym instructor, at the age of 23, Mr. T decided to enlist into the US military and served in the Military Police Corps. After a few years of doing this, he was discharged in the late 1970s, where he tried to get back into the game of football. He had a tryout for the Green Bay Packers of the NFL, but unfortunately wasn't able to make the team due to a knee injury he had at the time. Mr. T didn't let this setback keep him down for too long though, as he quickly bounced back, parlaying himself into his new career of being a bouncer, and it was this job in particular that would change Mr. T's life forever. He started his life as a bouncer at a nightclub called Dingbat's Discotheque, located in Chicago, Illinois. And it was in this club that the persona and reputation of Mr. T started to form. You see, Mr. T wasn't brought on board to just be any old bouncer. Oh no, because on top of guarding the door, Mr. T was also in charge of sniffing out and dealing with any drug dealers or users, which coincidentally led to him getting in over 200 fights during his time here. The big gold necklaces and other jewellery that he would become famous for wearing began here as well, as he would wear the lost and found jewellery that had been left by other customers after they had been thrown out for fighting or drug dealing. He also adopted his signature Mohican hairstyle around this time as well, having been inspired from a picture that he saw in the National Geographic that depicted an African Mandekan warrior. It would definitely be underselling it though to just tell you that Mr. T did these things to look cool, as at various times throughout his career, he's been outspoken about what these things represent to him. He says that his hairstyle is the way that it is so that he can have that direct connection to his African roots. And when asked about his heavy jewellery in an interview with People magazine in 1983, Mr. T said, "Nobody ever asked my ancestors if their chains were heavy when they came over from Africa. They had chains on too, I've just made them gold. The idea is I'm still a slave, but I'm a higher price slave." The mythos of Mr. T only started to grow from there, and the people of Chicago quickly caught on to who this guy was and what he was capable of. As a result of this, after just a few years on the job, Mr. T the Bouncer quickly became Mr. T the Bodyguard, and it was at this moment that the man they used to call Lawrence Cheroud finally started brushing shoulders with the stars of Hollywood. Mr. T's career as a bodyguard is one that lasted almost 10 years, and almost the entire time, his status and reputation just continued to grow. His duties in the early days began with him protecting people from many different walks of life, including clothes designers, fashion models, judges, politicians, and even millionaires. However, the good standing he gained with those clients just sent him even higher, as he then started guarding the likes of Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, and even boxer Muhammad Ali. For you see, even some of the toughest people in the world thought having Mr. T by their side was a good idea. After offering his services for nearly a decade, Mr. T was given the opportunity to appear on a show known as Sunday Games that aired on NBC television. For this, he was on a competition known as America's Toughest Bouncer, and after making his way through some difficult and ridiculous challenges, such as needing to throw a 150-pound stuntman and break down a door with his bare hands, Mr. T made it to the final two, where they were scheduled to have a boxing match together to crown the winner. Within just 30 seconds, Mr. T gave his opponent, a 280-pound Honolulu bouncer, a bloody nose and mouth, ending the fight and being declared the winner of this competition. Mr. T would go on to do the exact same thing again on NBC TV, only the second time around, the contest was called Games People Play. When interviewed before the final boxing match, Mr. T was quoted as saying, "I just feel sorry for the guy I have to box. I just feel real sorry for him." This line is important because it acts as the inspiration for another line that Mr. T became famous for saying, which we'll get into here in just a little bit. But of course, after uttering that line, Mr. T once again stepped into the ring against his opponent, and despite the bout being set up for 3 whole rounds, Mr. T brought an end to his opponent after just 54 seconds. Due to his appearances on these NBC shows, Mr. T wasn't just famous within the city of Chicago, but he was now starting to become known across the entire United States of America. And it was this notoriety that led Mr. T into his next big break. After seeing Mr. T win these shows on TV, actor and director Sylvester Stallone got in contact with Mr. T as he wanted him to play a part in his up-and-coming film, Rocky III. Stallone originally intended for Mr. T to only have a few lines in the movie, but after one thing led to another, Mr. T was eventually cast as the main antagonist of the movie, a character known as Clubber Lang. It was also in Rocky III where Mr. T's iconic catchphrase was developed and first brought into existence. Inspired by the line he spoke on NBC's Games People Play, where he said, "I just feel sorry for the guy I have to box, I just feel real sorry for him," Stallone wrote the line into the movie, "No, I don't hate Balboa, but I pity the fool." From that moment onwards, "I pity the fool" became Mr. T's signature and go-to line. The fame and spotlight that came from being a part of one of the biggest movie franchises in all of America at the time is something that Mr. T was able to take full advantage of. as from that point onwards, he was a set and ready, bona fide celebrity, and the best part was, he was able to continue being his same authentic self the entire time he was doing it, because that's the part of him that people loved. All you need to do is scroll through his acting credits to realise this, as for a solid 10 to 15 years, Mr. T either appeared in some sort of media as himself, or when he did play another character, much like when The Rock shows up in a beige shirt, he was just the same person that we've come to know and expect. The most famous example of this is when he played a character called B.A. Baracus in the hit TV show, The A-Team, where, despite appearing in nearly 100 episodes, he never really showed any real acting ability, other than, what would Mr. T do in this situation? Right down to the jewellery and hairstyle as well. But this wasn't an issue, because this is what people wanted to see from Mr. T. They fell in love with this over-the-top, larger-than-life persona, and in fact, it wasn't just the people who were falling in love with the man known as Mr. T, because there was a particular circus coming to town that thought Mr. T would be a perfect fit for them, and of course, this circus was known as the WWF. If you look at any sort of biography for Mr. T, on top of him being listed as things like an actor, a bodyguard, and a TV personality, he is often always listed as a wrestler, and it's usually the second thing right there behind actor. This is because in 1985, Mr. T and the Vince McMahon ran WWF would come together to put on a spectacle of which the likes the world had never seen before, a little event known as WrestleMania. In the 1980s, the biggest competition to the WWF at the time was Jim Crockett Promotions. Most notably, a new annual event that they had started airing, an event known as Starrcade. Vince not only wanted to try and compete with it with a yearly mega event of his own, but the WWF as a whole needed something that would give it a boost, because the company wasn't in a great position both financially and publicly at this time. That is where the concept for WrestleMania came about. But unlike Starrcade and pretty much any other wrestling event that had come before it, this show wasn't going to just focus on the wrestling. It was the goal and vision that WrestleMania would lean into pop culture and use it to help make it the biggest event that it could possibly be. The groundwork for this grand vision started to be laid in 1984 when Vince McMahon began cross-promoting with MTV, whom they put 2 wrestling events on with in the run-up to WrestleMania in March of 1985. These 2 wrestling events, one called The Brawl to End It All, and the other called The War to Settle the Score, were not only events that built up to the first ever WrestleMania, but in a way, they were pilots for what WrestleMania ended up being. Not only airing and testing to see how a broadcast event out of Madison Square Garden would work, but by also having celebrities cross over into the events. That is where Mr. T comes into things. On the second of these 2 pilot type events, The War to Settle the Score, that aired in February of 1985, a brawl would break out that would see Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff beat down on Hulk Hogan. So who jumped over the barricade from ringside to help him out? Well, it was none other than Mr. T himself. The entire exchange ended with police and officials coming out to calm things down, but alas, the pieces had been put into play. Piper and Orndorff wanted to take out Hulk Hogan, and now Hogan had a tag team partner he could face them with. And so, the main event of WrestleMania was set in stone. Rowdy Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff versus Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Around 12 hours before the event, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T appeared together on an episode of Saturday Night Live in the middle of what was one of the biggest promotional campaigns a wrestling event had ever seen at the time. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, it seems, as in those 12 hours that followed, Mr. T almost ended up pulling out of WrestleMania altogether. Some versions of the story state that Mr. T was unhappy because certain members of his entourage weren't allowed backstage, whereas other versions of the story suggest that Mr. T was worried that his opponents, Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, might go into business for themselves to get one over on the now celebrity. But either way, Something was certainly going down in the hours leading up to the biggest event in WWF history, and tensions were beginning to rise. Luckily, however, Hogan managed to have a conversation with Mr. T and convince him to remain a part of the show, and with that, the main event went off without a hitch, and delivered exactly what it was supposed to. The match saw Piper and Orndorff be escorted down to the ring with Cowboy Bob Orton, whereas Hogan and T came out with Jimmy Snuka. Muhammad Ali was the special guest referee for the match on the outside of the ring, and on top of that, New York Yankees manager Billy Martin was the guest ring announcer, while Liberace, a celebrity pianist, singer and actor, was the guest timekeeper. I just wanted to throw this in here because I know a lot of people get mad when WrestleMania has celebrities on it these days. But if you look back to the lineup of the very first event and why this event was put together in the first place, having celebrities be a part of the show was kind of the entire point of the whole WrestleMania thing to begin with, so people really shouldn't be too surprised when they see the likes of Bad Bunny and Logan Paul show up these days. The match saw Mr. T and Hulk Hogan come out on top to much fanfare and applause after Hogan got the pinfall on Orndorff after a failed cheap shot attempt from Bob Orton. With that match in the books, the first WrestleMania came to an end, and it's said that Vince McMahon was very pleased with the results, having drawn over 19,000 fans to the show live in attendance that night, as well as drawing over 1 million viewers on closed circuit television. The event was an overall success that not only allowed the WWF to stay in business, but allowed it to start reaching new heights that it was never able to do before. Mr. T's time with wrestling wasn't done there, however. He still had a fair bit to give. His next major appearance took place at WrestleMania 2, where he fought Roddy Piper in a boxing match, very much inspired by his character in Rocky III. After winning this match via DQ when Piper attacked both him and the ref, Mr. T's appearances became a lot more low-key, returning to the WWF a few years later in 1987 as a special guest referee, confronting stars such as the Honky Tonk Man. Following that, he made an appearance in WCCW, before making a few more appearances in WCW, where he continued working with his longtime ally, Hulk Hogan, famously special guest refereeing the match between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair at Halloween Havoc in 1994. Ironically, Mr. T's last ever wrestling match took place later that same year in 1994, when he defeated Kevin Sullivan in a match at the event that he was brought into the WWF to help compete against, the one and only Starrcade. He would then make the odd appearance on Raw here and there, before officially being inducted into the celebrity wing of the WWE Hall of Fame in 2014. Following his stint into the madness that is professional wrestling, Mr. T remained a part of the entertainment world for another 2 decades, appearing in many different movies, TV shows and commercials, most of the time continuing to play the persona that he had made famous. But no matter what he did or where he went, people still had strong memories about his time in the squared circle. Mr. T's journey into the world of wrestling wasn't a perfect one. He faced the same concerns and criticisms that every celebrity wrestler gets. You haven't paid your dues, you don't belong in our industry, or all types of comments that Mr. T had to deal with, most famously from the 2 people he actually ended up facing at the first WrestleMania, Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. But despite this, Mr. T pushed through the negativity and helped guarantee that WrestleMania would be the success that it needed to be for the WWF to survive. Yes, there were plenty of celebrities scattered across the first WrestleMania card of various different levels of profile, but only one of those people signed up to compete in a match. Only one celebrity signed up to say, yes, I'll put my body on the line and be the main attraction of this circus that you're putting on, and that man was Mr. T. It's hard to know what could have been because, of course, it never happened. But if Mr. T had never competed in the main event of WrestleMania in 1985, would the WWF have even survived, let alone gone on to be the juggernaut of the wrestling world that it is today? It's an interesting question to ponder. However, not the one we came here today to answer. But hopefully now that we're at the end of the video, you all have the answer to the question, who is Mr. T?
what the hell is going on here? Wait, no, that's impossible. No, what the hell is he doing here?